Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Carolyn Cooper. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Project Lead the Way. Today, we welcome educators across the country to discover ways that Project Lead the Way can provide an exceptional learning experience for more students and to share what funding opportunities are available to make that possible. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few tips on how to maximize your webinar experience. We have several PLTW team members joining us today to moderate the Q&A as well as the chat box. Please join the conversation, share your story, and ask questions by engaging with fellow participants and subject matter experts. Our team members are available to answer questions throughout this webinar, so please, if you have any questions at all, please submit them through the Q&A. But don't worry if we aren't able to answer your question live today. We'll follow up after the webinar with additional information and answers to outstanding questions. So again, I encourage you to use the chat area to talk about the content and network with other attendees. And we also welcome you to take our next step survey at the end of the webinar. Our agenda for today. So we'll hear from administrators about how they funded their PLTW programs and the impact that Project Lead the Way has had on their students. After hearing from your peers, we'll discuss the range of funding options that schools and districts have to implement or expand their programs, and then conclude with next steps on how you can get more information and apply for funding opportunities. If time allows, we will also answer any questions submitted through the Q&A feature. First, I'll share a brief overview about Project Lead the Way. You may be very familiar with what you are implementing, but not the broad range of our offerings. So our pre-K through 12 pathways in biomedical science, computer science, and engineering engage students in hands-on activities, projects, and problems. You've seen how this empowers them to solve real-world challenges and inspires them to reimagine how they see themselves. Now let's hear from our panel of educators about their unique experiences with funding and their programs. So again, just thank you so much for joining us today to share your stories. I will briefly introduce all of our panelists before we begin. First, we have Wade Bucks, Curriculum Integration Specialist with the School City of Mishawaka. Then we also have Dr. Therese Ellender, STEAM Supervisor, CTE Lead with the St. Landry Parish School District in Louisiana. We also have Dr. Jennifer Keffart, Superintendent of the School District of Washington in Missouri. As we hear your stories, I know you'll all mention various funding sources that you've used to elevate your students' experiences, but just as a note to our attendees, we will dive into the specifics of those funding sources later in the webinar. So my first question, how long have each of you offered PLTW in your district? I'll start with you, Wade.
We've had the high school pathway of PLTW since 2006. Our gateway program we've now had since 2016, and this is our first year of implementing launch at the district level, at a full district level.
Thank you so much. And how about you, Dr. Ellender?
We've had the high school programs for over 10 years. We started implementing Gateway about 5 years ago, and launched within the last 2 years very slowly, but this summer, not to get ahead of myself, we really did a huge push out for district this year for launch.
Fantastic, thank you. And Dr. Keffart, what about you? How long have you had PLTW in your district?
Yes, we started in 2016-17 with 3 of the courses in the high school, Introduction to Engineering, Principles of Engineering, and then Principles of Biomedical. And we have since then moved into Gateway courses and are starting to utilize Launch this year.
Fantastic. So tell me, what funding resources help you to grow your PLTW program? I'll start with you, Wade.
We started by looking, especially within our launch programs, we use a lot of different PLW grants, local funding, referendum funding, but to really get launch moving, we use a lot of our ESSER monies, and especially the ARP funds here as we move into the beginning of this year to hire 6 new teachers that will focus on our 7 elementaries and be specialist teachers specifically for launch. So we've used a lot of that funding to get the program up and running, get teacher positions established, module materials purchased, rooms set up. But from then on, we'll use a series of different PLW grants, local community resources, and just our referendum funding, just to kind of continue that support.
Thank you. And how about you, Dr. Keffart?
So when we first started, we utilized both district funds, local funds, but we also utilized some state grants as well. As we have expanded our program into all of our career pathways, and as we have moved into Gateway, we have also started to use some funding from some of our businesses that we have partnered with. And we are excited. I think Ashley is going to tell you a little bit more today, but we are excited to be able to utilize a PLTW national grant as well this year and partner with a local business to help support that movement into sixth grade launch.
Thank you for highlighting that industry education partnership. That sounds incredible. Dr. Ellender, can you share with me also what funding can help you?
Absolutely. When we first started as well, we used local funding and some state funding. We've used some Carl Perkins and some Title I, especially for our Gateway programs. Title I has been a big help, but for this summer and our big launch, we've used ESSER to push launch out. So ESSER has been a huge help for us for training, materials and supplies. We've really utilized ESSER for that.
Thank you. And then can you each walk me through the process that helped you with securing that funding? It sounds like you had funding, earmarked for implementing your programs, but then also I heard a lot of, some of the ways in which you moved into sustainability by adding different resources. Can you talk me through some of your processes there? I'll start with Dr. Keffart.
So absolutely, from earlier on in the beginning of our implementation and in the last couple of years, some of that funding has come in support with our PLTW representative. Some of that has come in, like I had shared, with our industry partnerships. And as we have continued to expand our programs from a state funding perspective, it is a 50-50 grant that we have been utilizing. And so that has helped with our funds from that aspect. But again, for this PLTW launch, the training and the expansion of our programming, Ashley Benning has been a huge help in that grant process.
Thank you. Shout out to our PLTW team member I see. Thank you for that. And how about you, Wade? What was the process for you in terms of securing your funding?
So the same kind of process and thinking about and just working with our local rep here in Indiana. Really, we had more of like an 8 or 10 year program, our implementation plan. All ESSER really did was just extremely accelerate that. Everything that we wanted to accomplish, we kind of already had laid out, and we'd kind of identified the things we had to have, those fixed and flexible pieces. And then what ESSER allowed us to do then is kind of figure out like what big buckets can we take off the plate. For the most part, what we used ESSER for was a lot of the pieces we wouldn't have to necessarily do again. So like the purchase of those launch modules, of like things like the VEX kits, where like it was just getting it off the ground. The same with like redesigning different rooms, buying furniture, those types of things. And then this year we rolled into the next 2 years, we rolled teacher salaries into that, but that'll just become a normal part of our operating funds, just with those teachers. So just a lot of planning, a lot of trying to figure things out, but we already had the plan in place. We just cut it down by a decade. So that was nice.
Absolutely. Expeditiously. Thank you. And how about you, Dr. Ellender? What was your process?
So for me, I'm very blessed. The state of Louisiana has decided that STEM is a priority. And so because of that, for our high school course codes, especially Project Lead the Way, we get extra funding for training and for implementation. So we actually get additional dollars for every student that enrolls in a Project Lead the Way course. So that helps tremendously on our high school side. For our middle school side and elementary, I work very closely with our Director of Federal Programs for title funding. We target our schools that are in need of extra support, is what we've done originally for Title I, to utilize that funding to get them those courses in there, because we know how important Project Lead the Way is and what it can do for our children. For launch, unlike the others, I saw a way. I've been trying to get launch into our elementary. It's a little bit more tricky. I have worked with Title I as well, but it's just been a slow process. The stars aligned. Our state moved to accelerate tutoring, and it was a perfect segue between ESSER and the changes in what we're doing in Louisiana, especially with COVID, and to try to recover learning, to be able to fit that into the ESSER budget, bring it before the board and get it approved, and to launch it. So I know. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate the pun there. What about, what are some of the things that you know now that you wish you known when expanding your program? I'll start with you, Wade.
So with the expansion of the program, I think the reason we had it for a 10-year plan, or for a long drawn out plan, was because there were a lot of moving pieces and a lot of considerations we had to make, especially when you think about the way we designed the platform at the elementary level, of having one teacher basically work with 450 kids throughout a week. So there was no kind of like ease into that setup. Most of these teachers, actually all these teachers we had, were pure elementary teachers in the sense of they had 25 kids that were theirs. And so now we have to roll through what that practice looks like in the instructional model, how to piece that up throughout a week. The fact that I'm only seeing these kids a week, how to make connections super early. Things along the lines of like learning all the modules at once. So instead of teaching a class, I'm learning that, 2 or 3 modules throughout the year. Now I'm learning 6 or 7 at once. So we made a few alterations with that. We did a sample rollout model where we have K through 2 is receiving the same exact pushes and pulls model this year. It's a kindergarten module, and we'll just keep continuously releasing more and more throughout the years. But even with those kind of considerations with the program, I don't think we fully anticipated how big of a lift it was going to be. But the nice part is I have great teachers that have taken on the load. And so they've recognized that there's an end product to this, and the end product is quality instruction for kids. So getting through those initial humps and kind of like wrapping, an 8-10-year project into a summer, those are the things that got rushed that we didn't have time to really debrief and dig into. But once we get rolling, now that we've been going to school now for over a month, we're hitting our groove a little bit, and those things have become minor speed bumps in the road instead of large speed bumps.
I hear you. Well, thank you. And then talk to me a little bit about some of the impact that you've seen the PLTW program have on your students and teachers. I'll start with you. Wait, I see you came off mute. Would you like to chime in there? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. So I think the biggest thing for our teachers, and getting over those speed bumps early of like just feeling overly stressed with new everything, was when they would talk to their teachers about how, only thing my kids want to draw now when we're doing drawing is they want to draw pushes and pulls. It's the only thing they want to do now, right? And so hearing just like the effect of that for kids was super exciting. The kids come into class not dreading it, but really engaged and wanting to see something new. And it's the biggest piece of that is that discovery aspect. And we really push that with STEM, with everything, with everything going on in the world. We want kids who are passionate about learning, and PLTW literally builds that inside of its modules and inside of its curriculum. And so that's been the best part with students. And then just the inner workability in between the content. I have our PLW specialist teachers already reaching out to classroom teachers being like, tell me what you're talking about in literacy and I'll make it fit here. I'll make everything work together, because that's what the whole point is drawing those connections. And so that's been really exciting to watch, not only teacher collaboration, but just student engagement go up, especially when we had a third of our district virtual last year. Those kids are back and they're excited. And that's been really fulfilling here the first month or so.
Thank you. And how about you, Dr. Ellender? How's the PLTW program impacted your students and teachers?
It's just tremendous, which is why I'm invested in it and want to push forward across our district. We see our students who go through our biomedical program. We have one that's already she graduated 3.5 years ago. She's already doing research at a university. We see it come to life in our students, whether they do research at a university or go straight into work. We see the impact on it when they get up and speak before people. It's a difference between students who do Project Lead the Way and students who don't. For our elementary, where we've been able to implement it already, we're still working through some of the logistics of the launch from the ESSER because it happened so fast. But where we see it, the kids love it. They're engaged. And I know our teachers, I wasn't able to be on the last panel, but I really want to share this for those of you who are on here. My teachers kind of got that last minute call because everything happened so fast with the budget, and they were still on break. School hadn't started yet. And we had a very early morning training, and it's 2 days all day. And when I walked into the room, you could tell they were not that excited to be there. They didn't know what they had. Some of them had been voluntold. I had about 2 who were actually happy to be there. And it's kind of getting the evil eye, I think. And but by the time, within an hour or two, when they got those kits out and they started digging, the only question they had for me is, are we going to get kits? They were so excited. The atmosphere had changed in my teachers. I had no more problem getting them to be engaged. And as we all know, when the teachers are excited and they bring that excitement into the classroom, the students are going to be excited.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ellender. And Dr. Kephart, I'll close with you. Same question. How's the PLTW program impacted the students and teachers in your district?
Absolutely. And I would say it starts out by the level that our teachers, I guess I should say the professional development level of our teachers. Because of the training with PLTW, teachers from our elementary through launch, through gateway, through pathways at the high school level, teachers are able to look at teaching differently. And so they're especially elementary teachers who do more than just PLTW, they're able to then transfer the teaching facilitation, the teaching of inquiry that is focused on with professional development PLTW. They're able to transfer that into different content areas and into different lessons. And I have seen that. I've seen the benefit of our students, but I've also seen that benefit for our teachers to start looking at instruction differently. So I think for us, it's a focus on, it's not about PLTW. It's not about PLTW being the one more thing. It is about being the driver and being the for that we have continued to implement across our system. We tie that up in our district with connections to our community and our industry partnership. And so the aspect of PLTW that we're able to utilize various careers from a very young age, we're able to show students what careers are out there to their passions and interests, and they can use that from elementary into middle, into high school, into those pathway programs, and right into job shadowing and our in our area as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kephart, and also for just providing that illustrative example of the career learning component for your students. Thank you again to all of our panelists for sharing your experiences with PLTW with us. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Will Krebs, Senior Vice President of Policy and Government Relations, and Sally Irwin, Senior Director of School Success, who will dive into the funding opportunities that our panelists just referenced.
Thank you, Carolyn. As a director of school success, one of my favorite parts of my job is working alongside the school administrators and teachers in creating a vision for their students. We just heard from our fantastic panelists on how they have seen firsthand the way that Project Lead the Way has transformed the learning and teaching in their schools. As you know, the very first step in that transformation process is in creating a strategic plan. And part of that plan is having a detailed view of the required investments and identifying the funding sources that you can use to support and grow your programs. To lead into the review of funding opportunities, it might be helpful to recap the investment categories that you fund. Project Lead the Way programs, as you know, vary in cost, but each program includes investments in 3 categories: participation fees, professional development, and equipment and supplies. The annual participation fee covers all of the curriculum access and software rights for your PLTW programs. To be able to teach one of our courses, a teacher must be trained in our Project Lead the Way core training experience. This is an online training led by some of the very best Project Lead the Way teachers in the country. Lastly, our curriculum is project-based and hands-on, so there are equipment and supplies needed for implementation. Federal funding opportunities are available for Project Lead the Way programs, and Will is going to give us an overview of those now.
All right, thank you, Sally. Up to this point, you've heard our panel speak about different approaches to funding PLTW programs, and you just heard Sally give an overview of the different investment categories that compose the PLTW program big picture. Now, like Carolyn said at the top, I'm going to go a bit deeper into some of these funding opportunities that you've heard about thus far, align them to those investment categories, and then highlight a few resources. Those resources are going to be key because I'm going to click through this information pretty quickly. As you know, it's pretty detailed, and so those resources will hopefully provide a lot more information for you. The first funding source we'll look at is the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, or even ARP. This act was signed into law by Congress this year, and it's a broad economic stimulus package designed to address various needs related to COVID-19. Included in this package are funds specifically for the education system. These funds are one-time and must be spent by September of 2024. It's really, really unique because you don't oftentimes see this, but as a source of funding, it's incredibly highly flexible, which represents a pretty unique opportunity to innovate and create equity and access within your school in a variety of different ways. As you heard from the panel, it could make sense to use ARP funds in a few different ways related to PLTW programs. Mr. Bucks, I think it was mentioned, accelerating program expansion. I think he said it really well. A long-term project became a shorter-term project thanks to ARP funds and using it to address those one-time expenses. These funds can be used for all three of the PLTW investment categories: participation fees, equipment and supplies, and professional development. For resources here, I'm pointing you to some additional materials from PLTW describing how PLTW fits within these funds, as well as a U.S. Department of Education landing page that would include your state-specific ARP plan. When you think about using these funds, your first stop is going to be to consult with your local district's plan, which was probably created over this last summer, because that's going to provide you with even more information about what your district, what your local education agency is thinking for these funds. The second funding source we'll talk about is the Carl D. Perkins Act, known as, in this case, Perkins 5, or even just Perkins. For those of you who have worked in and around career and tech ed for any length of time, you're probably familiar with Perkins funds. We heard this reference by name as well earlier. Perkins is the primary way through which the federal government funds career and tech ed, or CTE. These dollars are specifically for CTE and are allocated year over year. Every year, you get these funds. States and districts have plans that define how they're going to be used. The law is very clear. It includes 6 required uses of Perkins funds. Of those 6, 5 of them align perfectly with the PLTW investment categories. And when you look even at the language of the law, it becomes very, very clear how relevant PLTW is to meeting the objectives outlined in the program. I'm including a handful of resources here that will help you further navigate the law. Importantly, there is a link here where you can access your approved state Perkins plans too. This is really important. Again, some of the panelists mentioned this. When you think about spending these dollars, being able to reference your local plan as well as your state plan. Even beyond just specific uses, your state plan will give you a lot more details and clarity about your state's vision for career and tech ed. The next source I'm going to talk about comes from the Every Student Succeeds Act. Now, that's not a term you heard from our panelists. However, they did talk about some funding streams that come out of this. Specifically, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, governs title funding programs. You heard Title I, et cetera. This is the law that funds those programs and governs them. And I'm guessing that many of you have heard of title funds, Title I, II, et cetera, in some way or another. In ESSA, there are 9 total title programs. Each of those has a specific use or a few specific uses. We've identified 4 for which one or more of the PLTW investment categories apply. For example, Dr. Ellender mentioned using Title I for gateway and launch through targeted support programs, a great example of alignment. She also in that conversation mentioned her district plan and her state plan and thinking about how all that comes together to do it. Like Perkins, there are state plans. We've got a link here for you to get to that. And we've also created some materials that go through those 4 titles to specify what that alignment looks like. For example, Title II is limited to professional development, but it's perfect. PLTW professional development is a great use of those funds. And then lastly, I want to touch on as the title of the slide would suggest, a non-federal source of funding. This was something that all the panelists mentioned as well, and it's really, really key for us to highlight here. As you probably know, federal funds are not the only source of funds used by schools and districts to implement programming. In fact, the majority of money spent locally comes from the district's general fund, which is made up of revenues that come from state and local sources. This general fund can be looked at as the primary operating budget, and those monies are typically considered unrestricted because it's up to the local district's governing body, usually the local school board, to determine how the money is spent. The big idea here, and you heard this from Sally, you heard it, that the last question the panelists spoke to about PLTW affecting and being the school broadly, being incorporated into what the school's long-term big picture objectives are, just really, really said this well. The big idea is that when PLTW is in your overall strategic plan and your vision for how teachers and students will reach objectives and succeed, it becomes much more clear how this general fund money can be used to start, scale, sustain PLTW programs, in addition to those federal funds, be they like Perkins year over year, or like ARP, maybe a one-time opportunity. For resources here, I'm simply pointing to a very, very riveting, exciting accounting document. Yes, there are accounting documents specifically for education. And in addition to your entertainment, I'm including this because when you look at some of the terms your business directors in your district might use when they develop these budgets, again, you'll see nice alignment between their language and those investment categories that Sally put together for you. And with that, actually, I will hand it back to you, Sally.
Thanks, Will. In addition to the wide variety of federal, state, and local funding opportunities that Will described that are available for Project Lead the Way programs, we also have Project Lead the Way grants. Through these grants, Project Lead the Way will partner with your school or district to help you throughout your PLTW implementation journey and beyond. Applying for these grants is really easy through our simple application process located in your My PLTW account. From the home page, you just click grants to access the application. We will be awarding grants on a rolling basis from July 1 through June 30th, so schools can submit applications annually. Project Lead the Way keeps applications on file until June 30th of each year, so we may consider schools for more than one grant opportunity throughout the funding cycle. Every year, we also have a wide variety of PLTW grants available for our programs, including brand new programs and/or program expansion. These PLTW grants are made possible by our partnerships with leading organizations across the country. And since 2016, we have awarded over 5,300 grants to schools totaling over $51 million. And this year, we have even more grants available to schools than ever before. Are you looking to make a bigger impact in your district with Project Lead the Way by adding new programs? We have brand new grant opportunities for all 5 of our programs currently available on our website. These new PLTW grants will cover the cost of teacher training as well as program participation fees for the next 2 years. Please check out our grant opportunity webpage to find out more, and please schedule a meeting with your local PLTW team member to go through the details. We're ready and we're willing to find out more about your district vision and help you with your grant application.
Well, thank you so much, Sally and Will, and thank you all again for joining us today. We are launching a poll to find out what next steps we can help you with, and you should see that on your screen momentarily. We will use that information to inform the resources and next steps that we send out, and you should also expect to receive the first communication with a recording of this webinar within a week. PLTW team members are available for additional information, so please use the link in the chat to reach out to a Project Lead the Way team member in your area. This directory will also be included in that follow-up email that I referenced. So also, as part of next steps, Sally mentioned that there are a ton of resources on www.pltw.org, as well as the grant application that can be found on mypltw.org. Lastly, you can go to our website to register for any of our upcoming events. And don't forget to register for the next webinar, in particular in this funding series, which is focused on Project Lead the Way program sustainability. So please visit the PLTW events webpage from the link in the chat to register for that. And that concludes our webinar today, but team members and panelists will remain on the line to answer any questions that you've added to the Q&A. So thank you again for joining us. Please enjoy the rest of your day. And I'll check to see if there are any questions that we've got in the chat. Let's see if any have surfaced. I have one. I believe this will probably be for a Project Lead the Way team member. If I want to use a combination of sources, where should I begin? Possibly, Will, would you be comfortable taking that one?
I can take a stab at it. Yeah, and that's a great question. And, as Sally described, the investment categories, certainly they can be held together, bundled together, thought about as one cost, but part of the reason we describe it that way was to show that there might be specific funds for specific components. From a starting point of view, well, and let me also say, from the first place to start might be to have those conversations with your local PLTW team member who typically is pretty well versed in state opportunities, local opportunities, and might even talk you through how you want to implement PLTW, when you want to implement it, how you want to scale it, for example, what you're looking to do if you're currently offering launch and you're looking to gateway, or if you're currently offering high school and you're doing engineering and you want to add computer science, how you approach the funding blend might differ based on what it is you want to do in terms of implementation. And I think I can boast about those groups because I'm not one of them, so it's not self-centered, but I think that group who works with you in the field are really good at listening to the problem you want to solve and helping coach you through it. So I'd start there. After that, if it's me, and I'm kind of a wonk around things like this, but if it's me, I am looking at those local and state plans for Perkins, for title funds, to see what's already there. There might already be things on paper that your district is looking for, or might allow for a school that you're not doing, that you could step into. And so I think getting more clarity, especially around those federal funds, even looking at your district's approved budget, or having a conversation with some administrators and seeing, what's next. That's probably where I'd start. First, your PLTW field representative. Second, taking a look to see what's on paper with existing federal funds.
Thank you so much, Will. And I've got another question here. This is for our panelists. What advice would you give to other schools? I'll start with Dr. Keffard.
I think my advice would be look at your plan, tie it back, as has been shared a couple of times, tie it back to your strategic plan. What are the goals that you want to accomplish in your school district? And then how do you utilize PLTW to help accomplish those goals, whether it be through what I talked about, the inquiry-based professional development, whether it be through the implementation of STEM or STEAM in your school district, whether it be looking at career pathways. How does that implementation align to what your school system is looking for your students in the future?
Thank you so much. And I have another question here in the chat here. where can I find out more about Perkins funds? And that would be for a Project Lead the Way team member. Will, would you mind taking that
Sure.
one?
One of the links that you'll get as a follow-up to this, we've written documents specifically about PLTW and Perkins, and made those connections, like I mentioned, around those required uses, and gone through each of them, and even helped connect the dots around the language that the law use and the specific aspect of the PLTW program that might be eligible. I mentioned this, Perkins has been around, it's amazing. For over 100 years, the federal government has been involved with funding what was in technical and vocational education, has evolved into career and technical education. And so the information related to Perkins is pretty robust. And in fact, there is something called the Perkins Collaborative Resource Network that is a US DOE site that hosts a variety of information. I've said several times, information about state plans, but the other nice thing about the PCRN is that it makes it really, really easy. There's a drop-down menu, you find your state, you can find out exactly how much money your state gets in the most recent fiscal year, you can find your state plan, and you get the very specific email address, phone number, and name of your state CTE director. And so if you're looking for more information, it makes it really, really easy to shoot that email, make a call, get that information. I tell people all the time, I used to work for a state Department of Education. And sometimes, you might think, oh, they're busy, they don't want to hear from teachers or administrators. That was my favorite. I loved it when teachers and administrators reached out, wanted to talk about these things, because it's a lot more fun to talk to people close to students and close to classrooms than it is talking to some other people. So don't be shy about making that call.
Thank you so much, Will. I appreciate that. Checking to see if there's anything else that's popping up in our Q&A. I know we covered this, but I maybe just a little bit of a clarifying point on this, Will. What can ESSER funds be used for?
Sure. ESSER. So again, Carolyn, let me take an opportunity. I talked mostly about the American Rescue Plan. The American Rescue Plan was the most recent stimulus package, by and away the biggest of the stimulus package. However, there were two that preceded it, the CARES Act, and then one that didn't have a catchy acronym that I can't think of. But each of those two prior stimulus packages also include what Carolyn called the ESSER funds, or the Elementary Secondary Emergency Relief Funds. I think I got that right. So there are technically 3 rounds of ESSER funds, 1, 2, and 3. The law makes it pretty clear and easy. Basically, it says those ESSER funds can be used for any activity already authorized by existing federal law. So basically, if you had federal funds to pay for it before, you can use ESSER funds to pay for it now. So some of those things we've talked about, Perkins, Title, etc., very clear that that's an applicable use, eligible use of those ESSER funds. But let me also say, in each of the stimulus bills, there are a number of items that are specific to the challenge of the day, the COVID-19 pandemic. And so you have allowable uses around personal protective equipment, testing, communicating and supporting your community, et cetera. And those are very valid. I know communities at this point that challenge is hitting communities differently. And so there could be a lot of needs related to COVID that first and foremost need to be addressed. And I think that is, of course, very valid. But to summarize, any activity already authorized by existing law, and health and safety responses to COVID-19.
Thank you so much. Well, that's wonderful. I see that there's been a ton of engagement, and some of your questions are being addressed in the chat. But as we said, feel free to reach out to your PLTW director, and we'll also be sending follow-up resources to kind of help with your next steps processes as you kind of take this information and process it. Please feel free to reach out to us with additional questions. And thank you again for joining us and for spending your afternoon with us. We really appreciate your time.